In Port Charles, where secrets linger behind every kind smile and betrayal wears the mask of loyalty, a fresh wave of reckoning begins to unspool. The city's core families find themselves confronting uncomfortable truths, agonizing choices, and emotional fractures that may be too deep to mend. At the center of the storm, 5 lives unravel in parallel, each thread pulling tighter toward an inevitable, fateful convergence. Michael stood alone in the dim study of the Quartermain mansion, his fingers clasped behind his back as he gazed out over the shadowed grounds. The weight of legacy and expectation seemed to rest heavy on his shoulders, Corinthos by blood, Quartermain by name, and yet belonging nowhere entirely. The silence of the room was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic tick of the antique grandfather clock behind him. For days, he'd delayed the decision that now loomed large, one that could alter the very shape of his family's influence. With Ned back in the corporate game and his mother still reeling from the fallout with Nina, Michael was being nudged, quietly, but firmly, into taking on a role at ELQ that would give him unilateral control over key decisions. The seat was his, if he wanted it. But with that power came a cost: full alignment with the Quartermain side, a complete break from Sonny's shadow, and a betrayal of the values Michael once swore he'd protect. He couldn't shake the feeling that accepting the position wouldn't just define his professional life, it would sever something in his soul. Elsewhere, across town at the Corinthos estate, Trina found herself in a space she once considered distant. She wasn't used to leaning on others, let alone on someone like Jocelyn, whose life was tangled in the chaos of Port Charles in a far different way. But on this night, she could no longer keep the storm bottled up. She had come with the intention of making small talk, but her composure cracked the moment Jocelyn closed the door behind her. Trina's voice trembled as she confessed that her recent trip to New York wasn't the career opportunity everyone believed. It had been an escape, a desperate attempt to outrun the guilt gnawing at her since Spencer's disappearance. His absence was like a wound she kept pressing on, and the weight of secrets she carried threatened to drown her. She admitted to Jocelyn that she still received anonymous texts, fragments of information about Spencer's last known locations, clues that suggested he might be alive. But she couldn't bring herself to tell anyone else. The risk of false hope was too cruel. In Jocelyn's presence, however, Trina found something she hadn't felt in weeks, a sliver of safety. It wasn't advice she needed, it was understanding. And Jocelyn, despite her own heartbreaks, gave it without condition. Not far from there, at a quiet pier where the air was thick with salt and the scent of oil from docked boats, Jason stood across from an unexpected visitor, Monica. The cool night wind ruffled his jacket, but he barely noticed. What started as a routine check-in had evolved into something more confronting. Monica, with her practiced calm and maternal concern, had asked a question Jason wasn't prepared to answer. She wanted to know if he had ever truly let go of his old life, the version of him before the warehouse, before the mob, before he became someone feared rather than loved. Jason, for all his calm stoicism, felt the question reverberate through him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze drifted to the water's surface, where the moon shimmered like a broken mirror. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost weary. He explained that letting go wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. The version of him Monica wanted back had died the moment he chose to protect Sonny over himself, Carly over consequence. And though he didn't regret his path, he confessed that he sometimes wondered what kind of man he'd be if he'd walked away. Monica's eyes betrayed no judgment. She simply nodded, understanding in the way only a mother could, especially one who had lost and reclaimed her son more times than she cared to count. Across town at General Hospital, Willow's day began with optimism but quickly spiraled into something far more harrowing. She had gone in for routine blood work, just another checkpoint on her recovery roadmap, but her doctor's somber expression told her everything before a word was spoken. The cancer had returned. Aggressively. Invasive and unrelenting, it was spreading faster than they'd anticipated. Treatment options were still on the table, but this time the odds weren't in her favor. As she sat on the edge of the sterile hospital bed, trying to process the words, the world around her dimmed. Memories of her children, Michael, and the fragile peace she had fought so hard to rebuild flooded her mind. The irony wasn't lost on her. After everything she had endured, just as she began to breathe freely again, this new battle emerged like a cruel joke. She wasn't afraid of dying, not really. But she was terrified of leaving before she finished making things right, especially with Michael. There were things she still hadn't told him. Things she may never get the chance to explain. And then there was Drew, alone in the Pentonville visitor's room, pacing like a man whose time had finally caught up to him. His plan had taken shape over months of whispered calls, secret messages, and carefully laid misdirection. He wasn't out for redemption anymore. That ship had sailed the day Carly turned her back on him, and the WSB branded him a liability. Now, he was playing for something far greater, leverage. His eyes burned with resolve as he laid out his plan to a skeptical contact from the outside. It wasn't just about exposing Valentine's off-book dealings with pikemen or uncovering the silent investors manipulating ELQ. It was about dismantling the entire scaffolding of silent power that had kept Port Charles in shadow for decades. Drew was going to burn it all down, brick by brick. He'd already planted the first seeds: false evidence, misdirected confessions, and a digital breadcrumb trail that implicated people in high places. When the collapse came, it wouldn't be clean. It would be surgical, explosive, and irreversible. He knew the cost. But what he didn't anticipate was the ripple it would send through people like Michael, Willow, and even Jason, each of whom stood to lose more than they could ever imagine. As the night deepened and Port Charles settled into uneasy silence, the weight of all these moments lingered like fog on the harbor. Michael stared at his reflection in the dark glass, wondering if power was ever worth the price of peace. Trina curled into Jocelyn's couch, her confession a fragile step toward healing. Jason stood by the docks, his past and future colliding like ships in the mist. Willow wept quietly behind a hospital curtain, clutching the sonogram photo she kept hidden in her purse. And Drew, still imprisoned by bars and regrets, smiled bitterly as his plan took shape beyond the walls. In a city built on secrets, the truth always finds a way to the surface, but not without dragging pain, loss, and reckoning in its wake. Port Charles was bracing for a storm, and none of them were truly prepared for the devastation that would follow.